Hi, my name is Scott. I've made this video to both share with you some of the reasons why I love the Yukon and to help you explore it yourself. I've structured this video around overland travel by road. So I'll walk through and share scenes from the Yukon's major roadways and the sights and towns you'll encounter along them. In the notes below this video, you'll find a breakdown so that you can skip straight to one route or the other. First though, you have to get there. Unless you're traveling from Alaska, there are basically two entry points for overland travel to the Yukon, the Alaska Highway and the Stewart-Cassiar Highway. Both of these roads enter the Yukon along its southeastern border with British Columbia. I won't be covering those access roads, but I will share that they've each got different types of scenery and interesting places to explore in northern British Columbia. I wouldn't bypass either. Try entering by one and leaving by the other. If you want to explore much of the Yukon, be prepared for unpaved roads. As I go through each route, I'll explain general conditions, but the bottom line is that unless you're making a beeline to Alaska via the Alaska Highway, you're likely to encounter at least some gravel and rougher roads. And if you want to really get off the beaten track, you'll be traveling routes that will really slow your pace and are best handled with a rugged vehicle. The Yukon is big and wild. Roughly the size of Colorado and Utah combined, it holds about 42,000 people. More than 3/4 of those folks live in the Yukon's one true city, which means less than 10,000 residents are spread out over an area of roughly 185,000 square miles. The Yukon is the land of 14 First Nations. Each holds self-governance, land ownership, and exercises wide-ranging influence and control over the Yukon's renewable and non-renewable resources. Learning about and respecting First Nations history and present role in the Yukon is a vital part of appreciating this special place. The Yukon government maintains a fantastic system of campgrounds. Most of them are low-cost, self-registration with primitive services, pit toilets, picnic tables, fire pits, and untreated water sources. They're almost all in beautiful locations, but when it comes to natural beauty, it's hard to go wrong anywhere in the Yukon. One more big picture tip. Keep in mind that the Yukon is, by and large, true wilderness. Wildlife, including wolves, moose, bear, and much more abound. You don't have to wander far off the road to be in the thick of it. That also means you should be prepared to take care of yourself. I've found people throughout the Yukon to be incredibly welcoming, kind, helpful, and capable. They're also self-sufficient. And it's best to hold yourself to those qualities as well, particularly once you get off the major thoroughfares. So, those are the basics. Let's get on to the places you'll go.
There you go, thumbs up.
Let's start in with the major thoroughfare of the Yukon, the Alaska Highway. Also known as Yukon Highway 1, it runs a bit over 600 miles, starting about 50 miles east of Watson Lake and following the southern border of the Yukon, sometimes dipping into northern British Columbia. It veers more northwest for the final 200 miles leading to the Alaska border. It has a very well maintained and smoothly paved surface, with one lane in each direction, substantial shoulders, and wide, cleared right-of-ways. The Alaska Highway is easily the most heavily trafficked road in the Yukon, and during the warm months you'll see plenty of other vehicles. You'll generally find fuel stops every 50 miles or so, and I think the furthest stretch is about 115 miles between Destruction Bay and Beaver Creek at the western end of the Yukon. There are plenty of camping options with at least 20 private and public campgrounds spread out along the route. You'll get a great taste of Yukon scenery along the Alaska Highway. The eastern two-thirds you'll wind around densely forested hills, follow flowing rivers and scenic lakes. The western stretch features the dramatic, steep, alpine ramparts of the Kluane mountain range to the south, following you much of the rest of the way to Alaska. As you enter the Yukon from British Columbia on the Alaska Highway, the first major town you'll encounter is Watson Lake. With a population of about 750, Watson Lake has several motels and lodges, 3 or 4 restaurants, a full-service grocery, and of course fuel. Hotels and motels in Watson Lake and the rest of the Yukon may feel dated and rough around the edges to some folks. Keep your expectations in check. For dedicated campers, one of the government-run campgrounds is about a 10-minute drive away from the center of town. Ask for directions. There isn't a whole lot to hold you in Watson Lake beyond an overnight rest, but you may want to check out the Northern Lights Center and the Signpost Forest, where you can add your own signposts to the existing collection of thousands. Heading west from Watson Lake, it's about 270 miles to Whitehorse, passing along the way a handful of settlements with fuel and often a motel and restaurant. Whitehorse is the Yukon center of government, sole city, and home to about 32,000 people, or about 3/4 of the Yukon's entire population. It's a beautiful location on the banks of the Yukon River, but be sure to get off the Alaska Highway and head into downtown proper to get the full effect. The Robert Service Campground has a nice vibe and is located just a mile south of downtown, with dedicated walking and biking paths that take you into the heart of the city, or pick from among a range of hotels near Main Street. Some places to check out include Wood Street Ramen and Burnt Toast Cafe for food, and Midnight Sun Roasters for coffee. Max Fireweed Books has a great selection of Yukon topics and authors, and the McBride Museum and the SS Klondike Riverboat will give you a grounding in Yukon history. You'll also find a handful of substantial outdoor equipment stores and other retailers along 3 blocks of Main Street between 4th Avenue and the river. A range of big box retail stores can also be found in Whitehorse, a bit further from downtown. Heading west from Whitehorse, Haines Junction is just 70 miles further down the road. It has about 600 residents and several motels, a small number of restaurants, and one modest grocery, the Green Apple. If you're there during warm weather months, I suggest stopping by Village Bakery and Deli for coffee, pastries, and sandwiches. Haines Junction is a jumping off point for the massive Kluane National Park, one of 4 Canadian and U.S. parks that comprise a connected wilderness of just under 38,000 square miles. Near Haines Junction, you'll find great entry points to Kluane, with developed campgrounds and hiking trails that'll take you into the edges of the park and give a taste of the wildness beyond. From Haines Junction, you've got another scenic 185 miles to the Alaska border. In short, if you're just looking to blast through to Alaska, the Alaska Highway is your fastest route with reliable services, lodging, and other amenities. And along the way, you'll get to see a good sampling of Yukon scenery and culture. Okay, next up is the Klondike Highway, or Yukon Highway number 2. Starting at the border of British Columbia south of Carcross, it runs north past Whitehorse for most of its length before bending westward to end at Dawson City, for a total length of about 390 miles. The Klondike Highway is fully paved with 2 lanes, one in each direction its entire length. The quality of the pavement equals that of the Alaska Highway in its southern section, with narrower shoulders and less width of cleared right-of-way. As you travel north, the road can become a bit rougher and narrower, with trees and foliage near the edge of the road. Traffic is much more sparse along the Klondike versus the Alaska Highway, but you won't go too far before seeing another vehicle. Fuel is found every 75 miles or so, though the longest stretch is about 100 miles between Whitehorse and Carmacks. There are about a dozen private and public campgrounds scattered along the Klondike, including 3 or 4 of those government-run sites. Scenery along the Klondike is similar to the eastern portion of the Alaska Highway, with rolling forested hills, lakes, and occasional river crossings. Traveling northwards, the quality of the views increases and the narrowing road feels further off the beaten track. Carmacks is your one good-sized town between Whitehorse and Dawson City, located about 110 miles north of Whitehorse. It has the large Hotel Carmacks, and further on, the Coal Mine Campground, which also has a few waterside cabins for rent. There's also fuel, a couple of basic restaurants, and you can get groceries at the Tatchin Center General Store. From Carmacks, you've got about 220 miles further to go before you enter Dawson City, the second largest community in the Yukon, with about 1,500 residents and an outsized tourist presence. Part of that can be chalked up to its history as the center of the Klondike Gold Rush, and home to turn-of-the-century literary stars Robert Service and Jack London. And while there's definitely some tourist kitsch to be found, Dawson also has a vibrant, authentic character and fantastic natural setting. Downtown Dawson is about dirt roads, wooden boardwalks, and classic storefronts. A private hotel room and bath will cost upward of $200 a night, and they do fill up, so reserve ahead. The less expensive bunkhouse hotel is about half that cost. Centrally located with small, Spartan, super clean rooms, it has a friendly atmosphere, but you will be using shared bathrooms. There's also camping options outside of downtown and just over the Yukon River using the free 24-hour ferry. You'll find a nice range of restaurants and a mix of services in town, ranging from groceries to gold mining supplies to jewelry and tourist trinkets. Diamond Gertie's is a downtown gambling house with what they call period-style can-can entertainment. As near as I could tell, it's a place to send the tour bus crowd for the evening. While the tourist infrastructure is thick in Dawson, it doesn't overwhelm the sense of authentic community and the interesting folks you'll find in this remote location. And the setting is impressive, bordered by the Yukon and Klondike rivers with surrounding forested hills. Drive or take a healthy hike up to Midnight Dome to take in the panoramas of this unique place. Or hang out in the park across from Main Street and watch the Yukon River flow by. And if you want the been there, done that experience, head to the Sourdough Saloon in the centrally located red and white downtown hotel to try out the Sourdough cocktail, a preserved human toe submerged in the alcoholic drink of your choice. There's a whole ritual involved and a numbered certificate of completion for those who dare. Since we're up in Dawson, let's talk about two routes that get us off the pavement and into some pretty fantastic places. First off, the Dempster Highway, or Yukon Highway 5. The Dempster is a 550-mile out and back road that starts about 25 miles east of Dawson, just off the Klondike Highway. It runs mostly north and a bit east for 290 miles to the border with the Northwest Territories, and then beyond for another 260 miles to the shores of the Arctic Ocean at Tuktoyaktuk, or just Tuk. The Dempster is easily 2 full lanes wide for its length. It's largely built on a berm several feet above the surrounding land, which protects the underlying permafrost from heating and melting. There are occasional pullouts, but the edges of the road are steep. If you go off, you're unlikely to recover your vehicle without a power winch. The first 50 miles or so are forested around the road, but further on the trees get shorter and recede, giving way to tundra in places. Except for a few miles at the southern extreme and in and around the town of Inuvik, the Dempster is entirely unpaved. The surface conditions will require a little bit of description. In dry conditions, the road can be very dusty. In wet conditions, some of the surfaces drain water effectively and remain relatively firm and grippy. Other surfaces get covered in a slimy, slippery sheen of mud. In low areas, that mud can reach the depth of a couple of inches. Take care. Vehicles routinely lose control on these sections, injuring passengers, damaging vehicles, and requiring expensive and time-intensive rescue. Personally, I found the surface most squirrely around the middle sections of the Dempster, between the Peel River overlook and the border with the Northwest Territories. A vital tip here, before driving the Dempster, talk to the folks at the Northwest Territories Visitor Center, located on Main Street near the ferry in Dawson. They can fill you in on details about road status and current conditions. While the Dempster is remote, it's also very much a commercial road. You'll encounter 18-wheelers along its length. Those trucks move fast, and they can feel like they come out of nowhere. So take care, and if you pull over to take pictures, be sure it's in a place where other vehicles can spot you from a distance. You'll want to fuel up at the gas station located at the base of the Dempster, since your next fuel stop is almost 250 miles north. Fuel can then be found after another 115 miles at Fort McPherson and then 100 miles beyond at Inuvik. You'll find primitive campgrounds and attractive settings every 75 miles or so along the length of the Dempster. Even if you aren't up for the full length of the Dempster, consider heading up the first 50 miles, first crossing the Klondike River, and then passing through rich forest scenery to Tombstone Territorial Park, where you'll find rugged hiking, peerless camping, incomparable mountain scenery, and vistas that will etch themselves into your memory. Once past Tombstone, the hills and mountains level out some, but the scenery is always evolving, and the rivers, hills, lakes, and tundra will keep your head spinning for the next 150 miles all the way to Eagle Plains. Eagle Plains is a fuel stop, garage, government center, hotel, bar, and restaurant rolled into one. In the warm season, you'll find an abundance of flowers out front and some tent sites just north of the buildings. Year-round, you'll find clean, basic rooms, 3 meals a day, fuel, and a bar filled with taxidermy and incredible views of the northern wilderness. About halfway up the Dempster, 23 miles past Eagle Plains, you'll cross the Arctic Circle. This is the only publicly maintained road to do so in North America. If you take a break here and imagine flying straight east, you'd have to travel all the way to Norway before you pass over another roadway. From the Arctic Circle, you're just 37 miles from the border with the Northwest Territories. I'm not going to spend much time talking about those parts of the Dempster Highway inside of the Northwest Territories. One thing I will note is that shortly after you cross the border, the topography flattens out quite a bit as you enter the floodplains of the Peel and Mackenzie rivers. There are free ferries crossing over the Peel and Mackenzie before you reach Inuvik. And Inuvik going to have all of the resources you need out of a decent sized town, including groceries, gas, hotel, camping options, and even some tourist sites to check out. And then about 90 miles beyond that, you can reach Tuktoyaktuk with a recent extension of the Dempster Highway from Inuvik. And that's where you'll see the shores of the Arctic Ocean. If you choose to continue your route along the Dempster, I hope you have a great time. And in the meantime, we're going to turn our attention to the top of the world. If you want to get off the pavement and into some beautiful scenery, but you don't have time for the Dempster, try taking the free ferry just over the Yukon River from Dawson and check out Top of the World Highway. Top of the World is a very manageable 60 miles long, running east to west from Dawson City to the Little Gold Poker Creek seasonal border crossing, where you can continue on into Alaska. Top of the World is a well-maintained gravel road. It's wide, easily 2 lanes with adequate room to pull over and take in the sights. It's lightly trafficked, primarily by smaller vehicles and some RVs, and no real commercial traffic to speak of. There are a couple of decent inclines that may cause issues for larger RVs, but otherwise road conditions are fine for most any vehicle. There are no services and no developed campgrounds between Dawson City and Chicken, Alaska, which is about 40 miles past the border stop. Top of the World takes its name from the fact that it tracks along an extended ridgeline running along a string of high hills. The roadside often opens up to expansive views in almost every direction, and when the fall colors are at peak, the effect is electric. While it doesn't have the drama or extremes of the Dempster Highway, Top of the World is a great way to spend a day if you're based in Dawson. We're going to jump across the Yukon now from Dawson City back to Watson Lake near the southeast border of British Columbia. From here, you can turn north off the Alaska Highway to join the Robert Campbell Highway, or Yukon Highway 4. The Robert Campbell runs about 390 miles, arcing from Watson Lake in the southeast to Carmacks in the northwest. The road was about 1/3 paved in 2021, with more pavement being added year by year. Much of it is 2 lanes with broad shoulders, though segments between Watson Lake and Ross River are much narrower, to the point of needing to slow down quite a bit as you pass by oncoming vehicles. On my 2021 trip, I traveled 190 miles of the lower section without encountering any other vehicles. The northwest upper section is busier, but nothing like the Alaska or Klondike highways. There are 5 of the excellent Yukon public campgrounds evenly spaced out along the Robert Campbell, with additional campgrounds at Watson Lake and Carmacks. Again, these are self-registration sites with primitive facilities and untreated water sources. They can accommodate large RVs, but they don't have any hookups. Fuel on the Robert Campbell is limited to the two towns of Ross River and Faro. So that's 230 miles from Watson Lake to Ross River for your long stretch. Ross River is a modest government center and intersects with the Canol Road, which we'll discuss shortly. Faro is a small mining town located about 40 miles further north and west of Ross River. Both are modest settlements of about 300 residents and limited groceries and services. Ross River has a couple of small B&Bs and Faro has a small motel. Check ahead to ensure lodging is available. Both towns are located a few miles off highway with no services on the road itself, so keep an eye out for the access lanes to the towns. There are dramatic mountainscapes along the southeastern section and closer in forested hills and lakes on the northwestern half. The last 20 miles or so approaching Carmacks, the road parallels the Yukon River. You'll find lots of wildlife on the less trafficked southeast section. I've seen black bear, moose, and smaller critters, and taking a break beside one of the many lakes may treat you to haunting loon calls. The Robert Campbell is a good choice if you want to get further off the beaten track or are looking for an alternate route to Alaska by way of the top of the World Highway. The scenery is fantastic, but keep in mind that neither Ross River nor Faro have meaningful tourist infrastructure, and lodging options are limited. The Canol Road, or Yukon Highway 6, is roughly 300 miles long, stretching from Johnson's Crossing on the Alaska Highway in the southwest to a bit beyond the Northwest Territories border in the northeast. It was initially built during World War II as a service road for a short-lived oil pipeline, and along the route you'll see evidence of that history. Keep in mind that these artifacts are legally protected and should not be disturbed. The Canol is bisected by the Robert Campbell Highway at just about the halfway point, and it's often thought of as two different roads, the South Canol and the North Canol. The North Canol is accessed by a free ferry over the Pelly River at the edge of the town of Ross River. The ferry operates from 9 a.m. to 6 p.m. with a noon to 1 p.m. lunch break during warm weather months. And it's important to note that the North Canol is a dead end, so if you choose to go as far as the Northwest Territories borderline, it's a 300-mile out and back with no services. The road is entirely unpaved. The south section and the lower segment of the north section are reasonably well maintained, allowing for speeds of about 30 to 45 miles per hour, depending on the vehicle in use and the weather conditions. The road quality deteriorates considerably along the further reaches of the North Canol. The surface remains generally firm, no sandy stretches or deep mud, but there are proliferating potholes, some of which are very deep and can bottom out a low clearance vehicle. Expect to travel no faster than 15 miles per hour along these further reaches. The entire Canol Road is single lane, with adequate width for vehicles traveling in opposing directions to pass slowly and with care most of the time. There are often sharp drop-offs or heavy foliage at the road's immediate edge. Traffic is very light. Expect to see fewer than 10 other vehicles in a day. Almost all vehicles are local, often hunters or anglers. Other than Johnson's Crossing and Ross River, you will not find any services. There are two of the Yukon government campgrounds along the South Canol, about 50 and 70 miles beyond Johnson's Crossing, along the shore of the appropriately named Quiet Lake. You'll find another a few miles north on the Robert Campbell Highway outside of Ross River. On the North Canol, you're pretty much on your own for camping, although there is a pullout with a fire ring and picnic table about 60 miles up from Ross River at Dragon Lake. I'd say the entirety of the South Canol and the first stretch of the north to Dragon Lake is doable by a modestly sized vehicle in good condition. I would not attempt it in a larger RV. Beyond Dragon Lake, you're best served with an off-road worthy motorcycle or a high-clearance all-wheel drive vehicle. Whatever portion you undertake, be sure that your vehicle is in sound condition ahead of time. If you're up for the rigors of the Canol, you'll be well rewarded. Wildlife, gorgeous lakes, rivers and streams, expansive mountain vistas, and more abound on both stretches. And the North Canol meets the border of the Northwest Territories at a dramatic high point in the Selwyn and Mackenzie Mountains.
So I reached the end of the North Canol Road, which is a nice accomplishment. The border of the Northwest Territories and Yukon. Northwest Territories behind me. And some beautiful watershed border scenery with mountains all around, kind of a high point. Coming up here, there's been some beautiful mountain vistas over the past 30 miles or so. And it's nice to be at the top of it and to see this place.
There are a handful of other roads that you'll find in the Yukon. Most I've ridden and a couple I have yet to ride. I want to run through these real quick too. First off is the Haines Road. From Haines Junction, you can turn south from the Alaska Highway along the Haines Road or Yukon Highway 3, which covers about 63 miles before crossing into first British Columbia and later Alaska, terminating at Haines, Alaska. The length of the Haines Road is well paved with light traffic, easily manageable by any sort of vehicle. Haines is a beautiful town with all major services and ferry connections that could take you as far as Anchorage or Seattle. And you won't be disappointed with the Yukon segment of the route, which parallels the eastern border of the Kluane National Park for a good stretch, providing access to some great camping sites and hiking trails. There are no services between the endpoints of the Haines Highway, about 150 miles in total each way. Next up is the Atlin Road, or Yukon Highway 7, which departs south from the Alaska Highway about 50 miles east of Whitehorse. It travels about 26 miles south to the BC border and then another 25 to the town of Atlin. The full length is paved, 2-lane, with a nice Yukon campground about 3 miles down a dirt track along the way. Woods, lakes, and hills give way to higher mountains and a winding lakeside route once you're in British Columbia. Atlin is a curious town, well worth a visit. It's got a wealth of wilderness adventure options, a stunning lake, and alpine views. It's a tiny community where everyone knows everyone else's business. It also provides fuel, lodging, groceries, and even a couple of decent dining options. Now, as you turn off for the Atlin Road from the Alaska Highway, after just a mile you can opt instead for the Tagish Road or Yukon Highway 8, a fully paved 38-mile 2-lane connection to Carcross, which passes over the Tagish River and through the small town of Tagish. The Silver Trail, Yukon Highway 11, is a spur route that heads north and east from the Klondike Highway, branching off 110 miles north of Carmacks. It runs about 70 miles each way, passing through the town of Mayo before reaching the endpoint of Keno City. This is a road I haven't yet taken, so not too much I could say, but there was an interesting New York Times article that profiled Keno City back in 2017. Just the kind of headline to pique my interest. Unfortunately, one center point of that article, the Keno City Hotel, burned down in late 2020. However, the other lodging in town, the Silver Moon Bunkhouse, remains a going concern. This brings us to our last Yukon road, and again, it's one I've yet to ride. The Nahanni Range Road, Yukon Highway 10, spurs off from the Robert Campbell Highway about 65 miles north of Watson Lake. It runs about 83 miles to the east, where it crosses the Northwest Territories border, and ends soon after at a large mine site. There are warning signs about mine-related trucks in rough conditions, and there are 0 services along the entire route or at the mine site. Still, for much of the route, it follows a river valley between 2 ranges and looks intriguing, a likely route for my next trip to the Yukon. So that's what I got. I hope you enjoyed this guide, and I hope it's both motivating and inspiring in terms of planning your trip to the Yukon. For me, there's nothing quite like this special place. Thanks for watching. I hope you'll leave a comment and that you'll like or share this video with others. Take care and safe travels.